Hey, Lead Up listeners, Mike Harbour, host and publisher of the Lead Up podcast. I'm excited. This is another guest interview. You're in for a real treat. This is going to be a great conversation. One of my favorite topics is talking about, what goes on between our ears as leaders. And I've got Dr. Jamie Goff with me today. Jamie is a respected expert in psychology and human relationships and leadership development, which is our topic, obviously, on the Lead Up podcast. She's also the author of The Secure Leader, and where she argues that true leadership begins not with mastering techniques, but with understanding who we are and why you lead. And as you know, Lead Up listeners, we talk a lot about that on the Lead Up podcast. You can have all the knowledge and the skills, but if you're not comfortable with who you are, secure in who you are, really understand and aware of the things that may trip you up as a leader, you're going to continue to stumble down that path and really create challenges for yourself as a leader. So I'm real excited to dive into this conversation with Dr. Goff today. Jamie, welcome to the Lead Up podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, when I saw your book, and again, I'm not sure, somewhere in the social media stratosphere or whether your team reached out to me, but I was immediately intrigued when I read some things about it. I know, and thank you. You've listened to a few of my episodes.
Yes.
I know a little bit of my background, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit today. But first of all, let's talk about the book, The Secure Leader, the thesis behind that, why you wrote the book.
Yeah, absolutely. The thesis behind the book is really that our leadership style, our leadership behavior begins to develop far before we think it does. And actually, it begins to develop when we're still infants and we're in the cradle, because our early life experiences and those interactions that we have with our early caregivers really impact how we come to view ourselves, and then also how we come to view others in terms of their trustworthiness. And obviously, those are big questions when it comes to leadership and how we interact with our team members. Do I see myself as worthy of being in this role and of being a leader, of being respected and cared for myself? And then, do I trust my team? Am I able to let go, to empower them, to lift them up? And so the way we answer those two questions is really influenced by what we experience early on in our lives. And I think that's where, in some ways, this leadership book maybe is a bit different than others, is that I really dive into helping leaders gain some self-awareness around where some of their leadership behaviors come from, looking way back in their lives, all the way back to when they were young children. And I wrote the book because, kind of similar to what you said a bit in the introduction, in my work, I've seen so many times where leaders have the tools. They learn the conversation model, or they learn the technical skill or the tool, but they still have trouble implementing it, even though in their cognitively they know all the right steps. And that's, I believe, because they lack some self-awareness around what some of their internal triggers are that interfere with their ability to apply those tools effectively with their teams. And so that's really why I wrote the book. I wanted to dig deeper into where leaders are what really motivates them on an internal basis. And so it's really all about kind of starting with yourself as a leader before we try to move out into leading our teams. We have to lead ourselves effectively first.
Yeah, we're going to talk for about 35, 45 minutes today. I know we could probably spend hours. I'm already I'm going to love this conversation because I'm just thinking, I love Ken Blanchard's kind of situational leadership philosophy of teaching, right? But again, you can understand situational leadership, but as you mentioned, what's going on between your ears in that situation? Like, what are you feeling?
Exactly.
What anxiety, stress? You got to have a difficult conversation, maybe. Well, how do you feel about difficult conversations as well? I know for me, I'm a learner. I began my education when I was 23 years old, Jamie. And I had graduated high school. I'd been to college, but I didn't really begin my education until I was 23. I was in the Army, and I had a leader that gave me my first book I'd ever read. at 23 was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Mm.
So I spent several years like learning new technique, new skills. I'm not a fan of the term soft skills. I call them essential skills, learning some essential skills of leadership. But it wasn't until I got into my 30s, really, before I began the internal work that I
Mm.
needed to do to overcome some of the challenges from my past life,
Yeah.
become a better leader, right? And you
Mhm.
mentioned like trusting your teammates. We'll dive into that in just a minute. But I want to first ask you this, because you mentioned it begins in the womb. Would you say to the statement that leaders are born?
Mm.
What are your
Not
thoughts
me.
about that? Are you a believer that leaders are born or are they developed?
Even though I think that those early childhood experiences are really influential, can I say both and? Maybe that's a cop out. I don't know. But I do think that nature, I would say, kind of based on what even like the neuroscientists would say, is that nature requires nurture.
Mm,
So in order we all do have, kind of personality tendencies and temperament tendencies that maybe are kind of hardwired within us, genetic predispositions, all of those
sure.
types of things. However, it's really how we are nurtured um early on and then over time as well that triggers those kind of natural tendencies within us one way or another.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say, both and, because I do think that, there's some things that we're born with,
Mhm.
but I do think that leaders can be developed. Otherwise, why write this book, right? Like, why bother if people
Yeah.
can't grow, if people can't change, even if they have tendencies toward an insecure type of attachment style. Our brains are plastic, and we know that now. We know about neuroplasticity, and we know that we can rewire our brains and change our neural pathways throughout the entirety of our lives. And so yes, I think that leaders can be developed. It's not easy, for those who do have some barriers and things they need to overcome. It's not easy work, but it's absolutely possible.
Yeah. Thank God for me that God designed my brain to be malleable, plastic. It was mush at one
Exactly.
time potentially, right? But I often use my own story as, when I hear people give up on other leaders,
Mm.
I use my own story of, it was that one leader who believed in me that began to challenge me to become a better leader, right? We can dive into that a little bit more. I also believe that I 100% agree with you about we're born with certain natures and those need to be nurtured, but they can also be nurtured out of us, right?
Mhm.
I think of especially women leaders, right? Sometimes a strong woman, people try to nurture that
Mm.
a dominance or aggressiveness. Those are male behaviors, so to speak. They try to nurture that out of the female leader because
Mhm.
that's not ladylike, right?
Mm.
Or whatever that is. And so I think again, we need to be careful about how we label people, and is it a strength that we can nurture
Mhm.
in their nature to be, to be better,
Yeah.
to learn how to use that as a skill and not a weak. Certainly, those strengths. I often tell people I'm very high D on the disc. I'm a Type A individual. Early in my life, that was a problem. But when
Mm.
I learned to use those as strengths and not let them become weaknesses for me, I began to become a better leader. Certainly. You mentioned something a minute ago I want to go get into from your book,
Mhm.
the attachment theory. Explain what the attachment
Mhm.
theory is,
Mhm.
what the what different differences there are in
Styles are, yeah.
those attachments, how they show up for us, where they come from, those kind
Mhm.
of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So attachment theory was, developed, back in the 50s. So it's been around for quite some time, but continues to be probably one of the most researched kind of evidence-based theories to, especially describe early child and parent interactions. And then also quite a bit of research has been done on how it shows up in adulthood as well.
Mm,
And basically, what attachment theory says on a very simplistic level is that the primary human need is connection.
mm.
connection with others, and that we all have a need for what in attachment theory is called a secure base and a safe haven. And that means that we have a place where we are kind of unconditionally loved and accepted, regardless of what we do, say, think, believe, right? That there are people who love us unconditionally and accept us without judgment. And the second thing is that because of that, because we have that safe space where we're accepted, it gives us the freedom and the motivation to explore the world around us.
Mm.
Right. So you can see that in, infants with their parents, right? That if they feel safe, like if I know my mom is, sitting back there and she's going to run over and pick me up if I fall and hurt myself, I'm going to run all over this playground and explore all of the, different jungle gyms and go as high as I can, right? Because I know I can explore because I have safety right behind me. And we continue to need those conditions as adults. It looks different, but we continue to need that in our lives as adults. So that's really kind of a very simplistic, explanation of attachment theory. And based on how our caregivers respond to us in early childhood, we tend to develop one of kind of there are three major attachment styles. There's a fourth that's really based in significant trauma that I don't get into a lot in the book, because I, don't want to cross that line into, therapy, psychotherapy from like coaching and leadership development. But there are three major attachment styles. They're secure. And so that is when parents are good enough, right? They're not perfect because no parent and no caregiver is perfect, and they're going to miss cues, right? And they're going to make mistakes from time to time. But most of the time they're there. They're responsive, they're accessible, they're engaged with their children. They provide them the safety that they need. They give them freedom to explore the world around them, and they show their children that they're unconditionally loved and accepted. The second style is anxious. And for those that develop an anxious attachment style, they typically have really inconsistent caregiving environments. So, sometimes the caregiver responds when they cry, sometimes they don't, and the child is confused by that. They don't know what to expect from one time to the next. And then sometimes when the parent does respond, it's exaggerated. So it might be like screaming and yelling, or it might be overly affectionate in a way that makes the child uncomfortable even, right? So it's kind of really inconsistent, a bit chaotic environments. And then the third major style is avoidant. And that is basically when caregivers are not responsive. And so children in those types of environments learn that they really can't depend on other people to take care of them, to meet their needs, to express love and attention to them. So they kind of develop this like extreme independence over time. Like I'm gonna take care of myself because no one else is gonna take care of me. And then you can kind of see how those types of dynamics play out in adulthood as well. So that's kind of in a nutshell what attachment theory is, and then the three kind of major attachment styles that develop.
Yeah. I'm a good case study there in that. So without sharing too much of my background,
Yeah.
I'll let you keep diving deeper.
Hmm.
How do those three impact, just from again, we're talking about some deep stuff, but let's talk about
Yeah.
the secure, anxious, and avoidance. How
Hmm.
would each of those three kind of impact our leadership with
Yeah.
others?
Yeah. So obviously secure is the healthiest outcome, right? And so people who have a secure attachment style, when they become leaders, they're those, transformational leaders. They would most closely align with that, or servant leaders, right? They're encouraging and accepting of their team. They create environments that are psychologically safe, where people can make mistakes and not afraid to do so. They are not afraid of giving feedback, but they do it in an effective way that is conversational, and it's meant to, with the motivation of helping their team members improve. They're able to empower and delegate, to their team members, because even if people mess up and they don't do it exactly right, they have the feeling that it's okay because it's a learning opportunity, right? We're going to learn from this
Right.
together. And they're also really open to feedback themselves. And so, they're not afraid to be wrong. They're not afraid to say, I'm not sure, or I don't know, because they have that secure sense of themselves. They believe in their worth regardless of any of those other things, right? And then they're able to trust others. So that's what a secure leader looks like. An anxious leader, someone who has an anxious attachment style and is in the leadership role, these are going to be the leaders who are probably a bit chaotic. It might be the best way to describe them. They are really driven by their need to be liked and validated. So this might be the leader that wants to be everybody's best friend, who wants to be buddies, but who really struggles to give clear direction and feedback because they don't really feel confident in themselves. And again, their primary need is to be validated by other people. So in those situations, you end up with a lot of, there's a lack of clarity and sometimes confusion on teams. But those leaders are also, when things do go wrong, they'll throw people under the bus, right? Because they're afraid, they don't want to take responsibility for big mistakes. And then finally, the avoidant attachment style, when they're in leadership, they can kind of respond in one of two ways. It's either, I'm going to ignore my team because I'd rather be an independent contributor and do everything myself because I trust myself to do it right. So I'm certainly not going to trust my team, and I'm not going to invest in them, in their growth and development, because my value is in what I achieve and what I produce. So that can be on the one hand. Or on the other hand, if they really need their team, they'll micromanage them because they have a high need to be in control of everything that's going on. So they'll very tightly micromanage and not really allow people to grow and develop and figure out how to do things on their own. And they can be very critical and judgmental when people make mistakes. So that's, a quick snapshot of what those three look like in leadership.
Can someone kind of be a little bit of all of those?
Yeah. And actually, for the sake of simplicity, we talk about them in terms of categories, but attachment behaviors actually exist on a continuum. And so, if you have kind of secure in the middle and then anxious and avoidant on either end of the continuum, and all of us, even those of us who are primarily secure, we do tend to have tendencies to lean towards the anxious side of the continuum or the avoidant side of that continuum when we're under a lot of stress or when we're overwhelmed. And then, some people, and that kind of goes into that fourth style, people who've experienced a lot of trauma in their lives, sometimes they have a little more of a bit of both, anxious and avoidant. So it's called ambivalent or disorganized. So they can have kind of both of those manifest depending on the specific context that they're in.
Is that what the fourth category is called? Is
ambivalent?
Interesting.
Yeah. You'll see ambivalent or disorganized are the two terms used for it.
Interesting. Yeah, I know you don't want to really get into that. I'm kind of hearing myself in I would say I'm more of a secure leader today, than I've ever been, but I'm more of an avoider, by style. I grew up in a very violent, physically abusive, alcoholic, chaotic, dysfunctional home. And so I was just, as I'm sitting here diagnosing myself on those three, probably more of the avoider. I had, I kind of raised myself from the 12 years on, right? So just rely on me. I'm self-employed, right? I'm an entrepreneur, kind of a solopreneur. I've got my son works for me. My wife works with me. I've got a couple of other coaches that work with me, but I don't have a large team. I rely on myself a lot. So that describes me, although I'm a very secure leader today. I don't care if people like me, but I don't want them not to like me, right? That's why I asked, can you be on that scale?
Yeah.
I think I'm kind of somewhere in between all of those. You encourage leaders to deconstruct their story a little bit so they can get better. So talk about that. What do you mean by deconstruct it and then being able to move forward?
Yeah. I think it's, really important for me, I think, we need to look back to look ahead. And so there's just a level of self-awareness that, when we're, again, kind of going back to that idea that, we can have all the tools, all the technical skills and tools that we need, but if we don't know who we are and we're not leading ourselves well, then it can be really difficult to implement those. And I think the first step of leading yourself self well is self-awareness.
Mhm.
And so deconstructing your story is all about kind of looking at your experiences, looking back at your life and really trying to understand like what makes me who I am today?
Mhm.
Where did that come from? And it's not only understanding that, but then it's also looking at it and saying, okay, well, this behavior or this thought pattern, whatever it might be, that served me really well at some point in my life. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things I talk about in the book. Like some of those behaviors, the anxious and avoidant types of behaviors, they served a purpose.
Mhm.
Like when you were young, they were protective. You
Mhm.
had to do those things, right? Many times to survive and to get through.
Mhm.
But do those things still serve you today? Like, do you want to just be kind of a captive to those behaviors and those thoughts? Or do you want to be intentional about saying, these don't serve me well anymore? This is hurting me as a leader and this is hurting my team. So let me think about, okay, do I want to keep these things or do I want to move forward and change them? And so that's where I think really kind of deconstructing your story and digging in and understanding where it comes from and what those behaviors once did for you
Mhm.
that maybe they're not doing anymore.
Yeah, that's really good. You gotta do the
Mhm.
deep work, right?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
fortunately I've done that. I've done a lot of it,
Yeah.
still do it, right? Or you and I wouldn't be standing here talking today
Yeah.
had I not done that. But how does one find out? Do you have an
Mhm.
assessment, or how does one find out where they're at on that spectrum
Mhm.
of the 3 or 4 that you're talking about here? And then
Yeah.
once they find that out, what's next?
Mhm. Yeah, so in the book, there's, a short assessment in the book that people, can take to identify kind of their level of, attachment anxiety or avoidance. I also have an assessment on my website that has a few additional questions that, ask some specific leadership focused questions that people can go to my website and take that. I've called it the Secure Leader Scan, the Secure Leader Style Scan, and they'll get like a report back, from that if they take it. So yes, you can kind of identify where you are, and then once you know, then you can begin to identify again those behaviors that you want to keep or maybe don't want to keep based on how you're showing up, in terms of your style. And to begin changing and to begin earning security, as we call it, to become more secure, there are several things that you can do. I think that the two biggest areas that really can help us become more secure, the first is self regulation. So, learning to identify and understand our emotions,
Mm,
because when people kind of live in those extremes of anxious or avoidant attachment, they're really not very well informed. They react to their emotions, but they're led by them,
mm,
but they don't really understand them. And so in the book I share a number of exercises for kind of slowing down, looking at what you're experiencing emotionally and making more proactive decisions about how to respond, seeing emotions as information,
mm,
not necessarily as something you have to immediately react to in the moment. Um, so understanding your emotion, learning how to respond to that appropriately, being proactive and intentional. So there are a number of exercises that I go through in the book that kind of help people to do that more effectively. Um, and then the other piece, the second big area is really about connection. Like to be secure, we have to be connected to other people.
mm,
And that takes some risk, right? Especially if you do live pretty firmly in one of either that anxious or avoidant camp, right? It takes some risk to invest in more intimate relationships. And I don't mean intimacy in terms of simply romantic relationships, but
right.
just deeper human connection, and learning how to do that effectively, like learning how to connect more effectively with your team, through some exercises that I utilize, learning how to have more effective conversations that will lead to the outcomes that you're looking for. So those are some things that I talk about that will help you to, over time, become more secure in the way that you lead.
Yeah, that's great. I think, today, I wish I'd have met lead up listeners. I wish I'd have met Dr. Goff earlier in my life, right? Because we all need this. I'm going to go take the assessment. I'm going to challenge you to do the same. Get on Dr. Goff's website. We'll give you that link in the show notes. And also, I'm going to have her share it in just a minute. I'm going to go do it just so I am not assuming where I'm at now. But also, Jamie, I think we give a lot of lip service today to transparent or authentic leadership.
Mhm.
But you can't be authentic if you haven't done this kind of work that you're talking about
Yeah.
now. So speak into that just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think,
And we're
um,
challenging leaders here, right? I know we're
yeah, yeah.
challenging leaders because they think they're authentic, and I'm
Mhm.
a challenger, Jamie. So I really want to challenge lead. Like if you say you're an authentic leader and you haven't done this work, you're only lying to yourself. So let's listen to what Dr. Goff has to say about this.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, in terms of, like, challenging leaders, it's because you've done this work, Mike, like, you have worked on this, and I also wish I had known you before. I could have used you as an example of a secure leader in my book, someone who, really did the work and turned things around for themselves because it's hard and
Mhm.
it's can be scary, and, as leaders, we like to seem, like we've got it all together.
Mhm.
And, I think knowing ourselves really is the first step toward being authentic. And, sometimes leaders, when it comes to like authenticity and vulnerability or transparency, they'll react against that a little bit. Like, that's inappropriate. And that doesn't mean you have no boundaries,
That's right.
right? That's not what it means at all. But it does mean that you show up in a way that communicates that you care about people, that you know your own blind spots or you have awareness of your blind spots. And if you don't, you're open to hearing it from other people.
Mm.
And you, and the way they know you're open to hearing that is because when they do share things with you, you receive it graciously
Mhm.
with gratitude, that you willingly admit and own up to your own mistakes.
Mm.
So I think these are the things that demonstrate authentic leadership. And that when you are, and I think for leaders, like expressing our emotions, like, so when you are feeling anxious or a little worried about, something that's coming down the line, it's okay to be honest about those feelings with your team. You don't want to stay there and you want to grovel in those feelings, right? It's like that's validating. That's validating to your team, and it also shows that you're being thoughtful about how you're feeling. But okay, given those feelings, what are we gonna do about this situation to make the best out of it? And so, yeah, I think doing this work, really and truly understanding yourself, your own experiences, just provides you with the firm foundation you need to show up more authentically.
Yeah, I think being willing to do the work, right? If you really, for
Mhm.
me, Jamie, it was just, I didn't have your book. I didn't have this information. Really, it was from a need to provide a better life for myself, my
Mhm.
family, and those
Mhm.
that I led, right? I wanted to be a leader. I always saw myself as a leader, but didn't have the confidence to do it, right? And my emotion was always anger when things didn't work out,
Mhm.
right? Or because I'm trying to get back control. I grew up in an environment where there was no control, so
Yeah.
loud voices created control. Maybe it was just to shut everybody up and
Mhm.
quit yelling or whatever. I was often the mediator between my parents fighting, right? So trying to get that control back. And so I led with anger, or obviously I'm
Yeah.
loud. My loud voice works really well, but it always would get louder with anger or fear that would drive
Mhm.
anger.
Yeah.
And certainly I don't share my life, my story for any like empathy. I've done the work. I share my story because I want to be
Yeah.
authentic. I want other people to know, they're not alone in the
Mhm.
world out there, right? But you got to do the work if you want to lead well.
Yeah.
And some of there's a lot of capable leaders out there, but they're not leading well because they haven't done this secure leader
Mhm.
work, right? They're insecure, so they're second guessing a
Yeah.
decision they made or
Mhm.
second guessing a hard conversation they have to have, or second guessing the vision that they're trying to cast or whatever it may be. I'll let you speak into that just a minute.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's interesting because there's, research that points to some of this too, because I think it's what, like 90, I don't remember the exact percentages, but 90+% of people think they're self-aware, but only like 10 to 15% of people actually are. And that becomes more challenging as you move into leadership roles because you don't, if you don't cultivate it and seek it out, you're not going to get feedback, right?
Yeah.
So you have to cultivate it and you have to seek it out from people and be really intentional about getting that so that you can maintain your level of self-awareness. And that takes constant work. And I think one of the things I love that you said a moment ago when you were talking about using anger is a powerful surface emotion. There is always something underneath anger. Usually, often it's fear, like you said, right? Fear, disappointment, rejection, whatever, just
Loss of
feeling
control for me
dismissed.
oftentimes, yeah.
Yeah, loss of control. And so having self-awareness and being authentic is about being able to dig underneath of that because there's always like a, more powerful kind of surface level emotion or reaction and having the ability to dig underneath of it. So that's a big, part of that self-awareness too. And then the other thing that's really interesting, and again, I don't remember numbers ever. I don't know. I don't have that kind of brain, I guess. But another colleague of mine has done some research on like leadership and mindsets. And he kind of has like 3 levels of like cognitive maturity, essentially cognitive and emotional maturity. That's something only like 7% of CEOs operate from the highest level of cognitive and emotional maturity. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
Among all of us, and it is a lifelong project. It's not something we ever really and truly arrive at.
Yeah, it's another layer, right? I always say that, the higher we climb the ladder of leadership, um, there's another layer to peel back to figure
Yes.
out how to
Yeah.
operate at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're, again, these conditioned behaviors, they're conditioned from far back as our birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But along the way, we get conditioned, and
Yeah.
even though the brain is a malleable instrument, that takes hard work. And if we don't do that, those patterns are still there, and we're going to fall right back into those things if we're not practicing the self-awareness
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
constant and consistent basis. I wish I had it
Mm-hmm.
all figured out. I'd like to say that I, did the work that we're talking about. I didn't have this book. I didn't know you. I've had some therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent hundreds of thousands on coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching. I've tens of thousands on books. Reading, listening to people. Studying Christianity, right, has been a big thing in my life, and Stoic philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to regulate emotions
Yeah.
and remain, stoic in those tense, fearful, or, out of control situations. So I haven't done some of the things that we're talking about
Sure.
today. I just got lucky, right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, and I think a lot of those things are very closely aligned with what I, talk about in the book as well. So.
Yeah, let's talk about that for just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about mindfulness and
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. So share with our listeners what you mean by this. And again, most leaders are probably going to fight against this idea of mindfulness, especially male leaders, right? I'm one. I struggle with just like being quiet and being still and listening. But I'll let you speak into that.
Yeah. I think with the mindfulness piece, it's not necessarily, it doesn't mean you have to sit and meditate for 30 minutes a day.
Hmm.
That's, that's not what it's about. That's often what people think when you say that. And that's not what I mean. Um, it's more about, it's that attunement, I think, to your emotional experience. So for those of us, like you mentioned, and I also fall in that avoidant style of the attachment continuum. That's kind of also where I tend to lean when I'm under stress. And I kind of grew up learning that emotion in general just wasn't safe and wasn't acceptable, right? So I learned to avoid it as much as possible, not pay much attention to it, and certainly not express it ever. It was just like, I'm just gonna, put this in a nice little box over here and set it to the side.
Mm.
Well, mindfulness is about helping me, using myself as an example, take that box where all my emotions are and opening it and just observing it
Mm.
and learning about it and trying to understand, like, what am I really feeling in this moment? Because sometimes it's hard for those of us who are on that avoidance side of the continuum, it's hard to even identify what we're feeling because we've learned to disassociate
Yeah.
from our emotional experience. And so that's what mindfulness is about. It's about being mindful in the moment, noticing when you're triggered. And that takes practice,
Mm.
because typically we just react to triggers. So slowing it down, noticing, kind of learning about what our triggers are that kind of tick us up into like that anger or, being controlling or whatever it might be. And so that's what I mean by mindfulness. It's mindfulness about our emotional state, about our triggers, slowing ourselves down so that we can choose
That's good.
how we want to respond.
Yeah, that's really good. I call it observational leadership when I'm
Mm,
doing, observing myself
mhm,
while I'm doing something, right?
mhm,
You
mhm.
know, I'm speaking in front of a crowd. How am I feeling? Be observed,
Yes.
out of
Yep.
body experience. I'm observing
Mhm.
myself while I'm actually in the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
I had a coach one time challenge me to just ask the question or make the statement, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Instead
I
of
love that.
judging the emotion, isn't that interesting? Where does
Mhm.
that come from? What
Yeah.
what caused that? Right? And just being willing to be curious, be observational,
Yes.
without judgment on self, become a self coach, diagnose, or not really diagnose, but dive deeper into what caused
Mhm.
that emotion.
Yeah.
Because that's really what you need to do. It's not the emotion you need to deal with. You need to deal with the cause of that, right?
Yeah.
It's a preparation thing or whatever.
Yeah. And I think it's often driven by a need
Mm.
that we have, right? And so it's like being curious about your emotions, like what's this telling me I need?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so, yeah, I love that question. Isn't that interesting? Sometimes I, coach people to ask like, what's this emotion trying to tell me?
Yeah.
What do I need to learn from this emotion in this moment? What's it telling me about what I need?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good.
Mhm.
What's the common or one misconception about leadership you're hoping this book helps others with and kind of puts to rest?
I don't really know if it's a misconception necessarily, but I do think like we spoke about earlier, like, you know, I really believe that leadership is much more about the who than it is about the what or the how. And so that's really what I want to help people see. Like, if you want to excel in your leadership, if you want to lead high performing teams that, you know, do incredible things that navigate change effectively, then you need to start with who you are.
Mm.
You don't need to learn a new technique or kind of think about what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it. Eventually, yes, get
Yeah.
to those things. But it starts with who you are as a leader and how you show up. And that provides the foundation for everything else. And if you have that securely in place, then the what and the how will much more naturally follow.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm mentoring a young man right now, and we just had a meeting this morning. Had a meeting a couple weeks ago, so I meet with this kid every couple weeks, and he started talking about kind of woman he wants to marry. Right, he's not married, single guy. Kind of woman he wants to have, and so I challenged him a couple weeks ago. Go back and write down everything you want your spouse to have, to be like, to look
Mhm.
like. What do you want? What do you want her to be? And so he shared that with me this morning. So I read through it, and then I just looked at him and said, "Who are you?
Hmm.
Are you the person that can attract this person that you describe? Who do you need to become? How
Yeah.
who 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 is your being projecting?
Yes. Yeah.
because we're only going to attract people that are like, I tell companies this all the time. I write in my book, the book I wrote, Quit Losing Talent, about your employment brand. And we attract whatever our
Mhm.
brand projects, right? Who we are as a company. If we have a great culture, we're going to attract people that want to be a part of a great culture.
Yeah.
If we don't, we're not going to attract those kind of people. So it just goes back to what you're saying. Who am I? If I want to
Mhm.
be this great transformational leader, um, then I need to be that person first before I'm
Right.
ever going to be seen as that. My personal kind of leadership mantra is, and it's an old Jack Welch quote, and I know Jack gets a lot of bad press at times, but one of my favorite quotes from Jack is, when I was made a leader, I wasn't given a crown. I was given the responsibility to bring out the best in others, right?
Mm.
And so for me, that's just it guides me because I want to be a leader. I'm a type A, assertive, aggressive person, and that doesn't always bring out the best in other people. So that statement is just a reminder for me, hey man, yeah, you can lead and you understand leadership. You talk a great game and you're not afraid to be out in front, but you need to develop other people. You need to bring out
Mhm.
the best in others. So slow your roll a little bit, right? You need to be the person you want others to be. And so that's just a mantra for me. And that helps me kind of segue into thinking about this generation and
Mhm.
how we need to be better leaders to lead the next generation behind us so they, can perform at a high level. Talk about that a little bit and
Yeah.
why this work is important for that.
Yeah, I think that, obviously, if we're thinking about, like, Gen Z, specifically, these are young people who they lost they lost so much time,
Mm,
right, in their social and relational development because of COVID. I
mm,
mean, I just can't even imagine what it would have been like as a, 15, 16-year-old kid and trapped in my house basically, right, for 2
mhm,
plus years with
mhm.
very little interaction with with my peers, at least not in the physical world.
Right.
And and then also, we see that there are, kind of record numbers of like anxiety disorders and depression and just mental health issues, right? So there's a lot going on and
Yeah.
a lot of things that have just happened in our world and in the context that, younger people that are coming into the workforce now have had to deal with that, you know, others of us haven't. We've experienced other things, but that's something really unique for them to have experienced. And so that's kind of one thing. And so I think, being a secure leader, having that like compassion, that kind of non-judgmental, approach and accepting people where they are and understanding just like what has shaped younger workers as they're coming into the workforce and having some empathy for that is really important. And then I think the other thing is that they also are hungry, which is, amazing, right? They're hungry. They want to grow. They want to get feedback. They want to have opportunity. And sometimes, those of us who are maybe a little bit older think, well, slow it down a little bit. Like you don't get to be like, a senior leader when you've been in the career field, for 3 years or something, right?
Mhm,
Like
mm.
we want them to slow down and we can sometimes if we're not careful, we can like dampen their spirit. I want to be careful not to do that, but think about how can we really empower and grow them? And that requires us to loosen the grip
Yeah.
perhaps a little bit on how we think things should be done and provide space for you know, different ways of thinking and, the innovation that they might be able to bring, based on their own experiences and provide them with opportunities to use that and to make an impact because they really want to do that. And so being a secure leader hopefully will help us provide that type of environment where
Yeah.
they can flourish.
Love it. You reminded me of a conversation. I interviewed um, the first female Thunderbird pilot a few years ago. Her name is Nicole Malachowski. Not sure if you're familiar with her, but um, she would talk about when they're flying, the Thunderbirds are similar to the Blue Angels, right? It's the Air Force's version of the Blue Angels. But, she said, the term they used was loosen the grip. When they were flying at close, within inches of each other, when you hit turbulence, our natural reaction is to grab the grip and try to control it. But, their training was to loosen the grip and let the plane, it's not let go of it, but loosen the grip, the plane do its work, because it'll typically fly through that turbulence without you trying to over adjust. We're in turbulent times. I'm saying, I'm talking every day to leaders. This is the hardest time to be a leader ever in the history of the world, right? I believe, because we've got 5 different generations in the workplace. We've got the challenges of the Gen Zers that you've just talked about, and the things that they went through. We also, as parents, created a lot of those challenges by the way we hovered over our kids and helicopter parent them and not let them, have some fun or control. And, there's some good reasons for some of that. There's some bad reasons for some of that, right? And so what I'm challenging leaders to do is get better. We have to get better. I plan on doing what I do for another 20 years at least. But I plan on getting better each of those next 20 years so that I can have an impact on the, generations behind me. I love this book, Jamie. I think, we could probably talk another couple hours and not really get everything that I'd love to get to. But thank you for coming on the Lead Up podcast and sharing with our listeners. Listeners, I want to challenge you to go to Jamie's website, which I'm going to ask her to give to us in just a minute, and take the assessment. Find out where you are, and don't judge that. Don't prejudge that. Don't even assume. Like I assume I'm a secure leader today. I know I've done a lot of work. I bet I still have some of those avoidance challenges, and I can't remember the middle one, but I'm sure I still have some of those, right? But I want to challenge you to go take the assessment, buy a copy of Jamie's book, and begin to do the work so that you can be a better leader right now and for the generations behind us. Jamie, share your website, share where we can find a copy of your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is drjamiegoff.com. The tricky thing is that Jamie, it's drjamiegoff.com.
Right.
So drjamiegoff.com. And the book is available. Well, I think by the time this airs, it will be available. So it releases in a couple of weeks now, but it's available wherever books are sold. So Amazon, bookshop.org, if you want to support your local bookstore, Barnes & Noble, online. So anywhere books are sold, you can find it. And I thank you, Mike, so much for having me on here and for your support.
Yeah, so Lead Up listeners, we'll make sure, check the show notes. We'll put the links to website, also Jamie's LinkedIn link, so you can connect with her on LinkedIn. Jamie's available to coach, teach, speak. So make sure you connect with her there. If you need somebody to come in and share some of these ideas and tips with you as a leader, maybe you need coaching. All of us need coaching. I spend tens of thousands of dollars on myself every year for coaching. Even though I'm a coach, I need coaching. Yeah. So if you're a leader and you want your leadership to be better next year, I highly invest in investing in a coach, whether it's Jamie, me, or someone else. Get a good coach. And I'm a believer in Jamie's work. I know the work that I've done and the work that I'm continuing to do. I can't wait to learn more from Jamie and dive into her book and go take the assessment. You do the same. Thanks for being a listener on the Lead Up podcast. Jamie, thanks for being a great guest.
Thank you.